I was born in Serbia in the south, in Niš. As a child, I was about 5 years old during the bombing. So at that point, my father was like, you and your mom and your baby sister have to get out somehow because it's not safe. So for that, we then went through Bulgaria, and then from Bulgaria, we managed to kind of walk our final parts to Greece, and we spent a couple of months in Greece. My first flight to the UK was actually on the scholarship from the Oxford Royal Academy. My medical degree is from University College London. And actually, my first flight to the US was also on a scholarship by the British Computer Society. And I remember I was like, wow, like this is amazing. And like so many opportunities. And actually, the way I learned about venture capital, I was second year of medical school at UCL, and I was discovered through this competition called the F Factor, which was like X Factor, but for STEM. And I remember like being at the audience, and I met like Nicholas Zenstrom, the founder of Skype, and others. I think I just turned 20, and I was like, oh my God, like what is this venture capital that what is this company venture capital that everybody works for that I've never heard? And that was kind of like how I actually discovered that this thing exists, that you could be able to pursue your passion and work hard, and like people will fund it, and you could get investors. And that thing doesn't exist like where we are. I think like coming with that background, when I came to the US, especially for the field for biotech and medical innovation, it was a journey. And I think that makes you appreciate every day as like an opportunity. And you really look at the environment as this is just like such a great environment to build. And you appreciate that, I think, and you have that sense of urgency, perhaps at least in my case. And I know we chatted about this, how it was for you. Like sometimes that like turbulent background just like sets you on a path of resilience and grit, which are extremely important for startups.
This Wall Street Journal article, which we discussed, that came out 3 weeks ago or so, that was pretty alarming, but detailed about how the birth rates are now falling to something like 2.2 births per woman globally. So this is the first time in humankind where we're reaching, or perhaps even below, the rate that's needed to just have stable population. I know there are lots of factors that lead to this, but maybe touch on what's the role of fertility in this global trend, and how do you see that evolving?
I think ultimately what we do know from research is that the way we kind of, with the current socioeconomic and demographic factors, we run out of time. There is data from the US that shows that actually people who choose to have children would like to have bigger families. But again, they run out of time. So the ideal number is still that more 2 to 3, but they come and say like, oh, I actually managed to have 1 or 2 by the time I was ready to have children. So I think that's where, inventions and miracle of science like IVF and fertility specialists who are able to provide that care do come into play, because they could allow people who want to have children at their own timeline when they wish to do so and fulfill their family goals, as well as all of the other goals that, may be equally important. So I think that's where we will see that, 1 in 5 couples today struggle with infertility. That's like with their heterosexual couples. Many more homosexual couples rely on science to build their families. Then we have a lot of increased need for IVF due to recognition of genetic disease, enable of embryo sequencing. So I think like the one thing to understand is that, when we think about family building, it is everyone's problem. It is both men and women. It can, affect everyone, and it can, affect both like from a very personal perspective to a medical perspective to as you mentioned, like a societal perspective as we think about the demographics and so forth. And I think that's where IVF and accessible fertility care could play a role to allow more people to, who want to get access to care they need. To get mature eggs out to do IVF and egg freezing, the process on the woman's side involves about 10 to 14 days of often twice daily hormonal injections. And what we, repeatedly hear on the female side is that it's a difficult process, and it more comes into play when you have to repeat it. So the current data says that in order to get a baby, many couples need to do 3 cycles of IVF, and it is still a numbers game. So if you think about it then, like, it is just really hard on a woman's body. So that's kind of where the idea for our lead program Fertilo came from. It was like, well, these, we're building these ovaries in a dish. How do eggs mature in the ovary? They mature with the signaling from these ovarian support cells. There's a reason why we have them. And they help with the signaling. So if you could, for a more in vitro experience, take the eggs a little bit earlier and perform the final step of maturation outside of the body with these young engineered ovarian support cells, almost recreate a follicle in a dish, you could shorten that process. And you could provide a young ovarian support cell signaling environment to every woman in a dish. So that was the idea behind it. And then you're like, well, then it's like a no-brainer. Why wouldn't I have access to egg freezing if it was much easier and if I could do it over a weekend? So the way we, hope Fertilo, the impact would be is to increase access and make the treatment more empowering, because that's what, it invented to do so.
Obviously, before live births, you did a bunch of testing to make sure that your process is similar to standard IVF. Maybe talk a little bit about that and how much data science was perhaps involved.
Yeah, absolutely. So, frankly, like what we are doing now with cell engineering was not possible, 10 years ago. And certainly with sequencing, like we were doing things like single cell sequencing and protein and gene expression and a whole epigenome. So there are now ways to look at the molecular signatures and test for safety in a much, much better way than even following somebody, a single individual until they're 100, which is certainly very hard. So that was the enablement of the work. And then
that's why now?
Exactly, because the techniques literally didn't exist. And there was a Nobel Prize in medicine to Yamanaka, who started this space about transcription factors. And we essentially leveraged, he was like, this is how you make a stem cell. And then we were like, okay, how can we then leverage that cell that can be anything to make it an ovarian support cell? So that happened in 2010. So, this is really something that is only possible this decade. And we have been pioneering this space, and we actually licensed the first world's clinically and commercially available female stem cell line. The kind of the gene therapies and the cell therapies you hear about, they're all male. But which is fine if you have a diabetes problem or a cancer problem. But if you want to build a cell of the ovary, it's a little bit of a problem. So that was kind of really we were the first movers to apply this technology in women's health. And then the work that we did was then around, how do we then sequence and show that the eggs that are matured in vitro with this process are identical to the eggs that are mature inside of the body. And to add a bit of background, this concept of maturing outside of the body is not our invention. So it's been around for a long time. We had about 10,000 live births with in vitro maturation. The oldest IVM baby was born in 1991 from a recorded follow-up. So they're, if IVF babies are in their mid-40s, IVM babies are in their mid-30s. It is no longer even considered experimental, neither by the American nor European Society of Reproductive Medicine. So we do know that if the babies are born by this method, that that it works and it's safe. But it's just that the efficacy currently of the current products for in vitro maturation is just much lower. So you don't end up doing it because it's doesn't work so well. So we really kind of bring that bar of efficacy of in vitro maturation so that people can benefit from the short-end stimulation and accessibility and reduction in side effects and much better patient experience.